In 2020 and 2021, amidst an unprecedented global pandemic, while the coronavirus ran rampant in America and everywhere else in the world, Donald Trump and his administration executed 13 people on death row. No other president in American history over the past 120 years had executed more people than Trump did in his first and only term. Several of those who were punished by death suffered from mental illness. The United States Supreme Court ruled the practice of putting the mentally retarded to death as unconstitutional in the 2002 landmark case known as Atkins v. Virginia. The Supreme Court took into account the Eighth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which contains protections against cruel and unusual punishment. The court found that in an evolving society which sought to protect and embrace those who suffered from mental illness, executing a man who has been clinically diagnosed with a mental illness would, in fact, be cruel and unusual punishment pursuant to the Eighth Amendment. In January of 2021, Corey Johnson, a mentally disabled man, was executed as part of the Trump administration's spree of executions in the final months of his term. Mr. Johnson was the 12th of 13 people executed during Trump's term. Mr. Johnson ultimately died at the hands of the law on the night of January 14th at the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. Mr. Johnson was not only mentally disabled, but was also suffering from COVID-19, as were many others in prison at the time, in the midst of a global pandemic. It is believed that Johnson's lung condition, as a result of COVID-19, would make the lethal injection far more painful and cruel than usual. Corey Johnson was hardly the only mentally disabled individual executed in the Trump administration's rush to execute inmates on death row. Alfred Bourgeois was a man whose IQ was between 70 to 75, which constitutes as mentally retarded. The court decided to ignore the landmark ruling of Atkins and proceeded to execute Alfred Bourgeois on the night of December 11th, where he maintained his innocence, strapped to a gurney, where he ultimately received his lethal injection in Terre Haute. Atkins is not the only case that seeks to protect the mentally disabled from cruel and unusual punishment. Ford versus Wainwright, a 1986 ruling, also condemns the death penalty sanctioned onto an individual suffering from mental illness. The United States Supreme Court did, in fact, find the execution of a severely mentally disabled individual, like Mr. Ford in this case, was in violation of the citizens' Eighth Amendment protections against cruel and unusual punishment. Justice Thurgood Marshall cited the Eighth Amendment in his finding, stating that executing a severely mentally disabled man, like Mr. Ford, was a savage and inhumane means of punishment. Lynn Inseroth of Akron Law explores the constitutionality of executing the mentally disabled in this Akron Law Review article. She maintains that the establishment of the death penalty claims that capital punishment is reserved only for individuals who fit a narrow category of the most serious crimes and whose extreme culpability makes them the most deserving of execution. Inseroth argues that those who suffer from mental illness do not fill this bill of the most deserving of execution. The term mental illness is an umbrella term that covers a vast area of mental disabilities of individuals, and there is no real definition of a mental illness. Inseroth also cites Furman versus Georgia, a 1972 ruling in which a man was burglarizing a house and accidentally fired off a shot from a firearm he was equipped with, killing a resident of the house. Furman was charged with a first-degree murder. It was sentenced to death. The United States Supreme Court heard the case and was to decide whether an accidental killing was worthy of a capital punishment. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that capital punishment was a cruel and unusual punishment for an individual charged with an accidental killing pursuant to the Eighth Amendment. The landmark ruling created a wave of philosophical and legislative change in the framework of capital punishment. Helen Shin of the Fordham Law Review discusses the lack of executions of the mentally ill all across the world except in the United States. She refers to experts in fields such as psychology, psychiatry, and law who vehemently oppose the death penalty for the mentally ill as the reason why executing the mentally ill is outlawed almost globally. Shin argues that the United States should follow the rapidly changing social care given to the mentally disabled and ban the practice of these executions. However, Shin notes that it would be a long, tenuous journey to do so. Today, all 50 states in America prohibit the execution of an individual deemed clinically insane. Perhaps legislators should explore expanding this amendment to capital punishment to include those who suffer from any mental illness, not just the legally insane. It is encouraging that today's society is portraying a more positive light on those who suffer from mental illness and create new avenues for the mentally disabled to succeed in. But as recently as 5 days before President Joe Biden was inaugurated in January of 2021, this country was still executing the mentally disabled in the middle of a global pandemic. We do need to protect our society from those who are detrimental to society, but we also need to protect those who suffer from complex and clinically diagnosed mental illnesses as well.